Everyone, my name is Alyssa and I'm a career advisor and educator here at MUD. I'm joined today by one of our peer consultants, Niall. Thank you all for joining us today for another Unspoken Rules from Mudders to Mudders webinar. Today, our topic of discussion is women in the workplace. We're joined by some of our wonderful alumni. And before we dive into this conversation on your experiences navigating the industry as working professional women, I'll hand it over to you and give you guys the opportunity to introduce yourselves.
Absolutely. I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Faith Limmer-Baton. I was a 2017 alum studying engineering. I focused in design, manufacturing, and management. The first few years out of MUD, I worked at both Niagara Bottling and McMaster Carr. I'm sure some familiar names to those in the group. I worked in a combination of manufacturing, sales, operations, and then during COVID, I made the switch to work in the wine industry, which has always been a dream of mine. So I'm now the tasting room manager at Troon Vineyard in Oregon. So I'm excited to be talking to you guys today.
Thanks, Faye. Hello, everyone. My name is Shailee. I graduated in 2018 at Harvey Mudd. I was an attempted engineering major, had a pretty bad rocket failure, and then I ended up going over to computer science. And then while I was Mudd, I was also involved with ASHMIC. I was the president during one of the years, so I love to get involved with the culture and the community. After Harvey Mudd, I have been a product manager. I first was focused in Microsoft Bing on the AI ML side, and now I'm actually working at Uber Freight, focused on how we can help our truck drivers find the best work and haul water bottles for Niagara bottles, for example. And then in my free time, one of my favorite parts of the week has been our MUD Meditates on Mondays, and I actually see some familiar folks on this call where every Monday there's been a group of MUD alums, students, and community members coming together to do some yoga and meditation and de-stress during the pandemic. I'm very happy to talk to all of you today.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for introducing yourselves. We do have some questions to start us off. Niall?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys for taking the time out of your days to join us. So sure, let's jump right in. So we're talking today about being a woman in the workplace and whatnot. So that's kind of our theme. So just to start off, you guys both mentioned your roles that you went into starting out, coming right out of MUD, and what you're in now. And so we're just wondering, what were the biggest changes or challenges that you saw generally in shifting from MUD, from the academic side to the more career-oriented side of your life?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would invite Shailee to jump in at any time to add. Feel free to interrupt, because I'm sure you have some similar experiences. What was really interesting to me is I found in the classrooms at MUD that I felt a good balance between people of different backgrounds and people across different genders. And going into the workplace, specifically manufacturing, my first experience was as an intern at Niagara Bottling. That was kind of jarring to be the only woman in a whole office building and in a whole plant. Absolutely. So that was kind of jarring. And outside of that, I would also say that just the difference between college and career, and something that I've been able to put into words recently, is you're not assigned homework every day anymore. You have to figure out how to fill your own time at your job, and that can be easier some days than others. So that was something that, being a young entry-level engineer, was fun to be trying to find my own projects instead of being given problem sets to solve. That was an interesting transition.
Yeah, I can add on to that. Just off of the homework piece, when we were in college, there's problem sets. So there's a very defined start and end. You're done, yeah, there's always another problem set, but everything is well contained. Maximum something will last a semester. At least in the workforce, things can go on for so long. I had a couple of projects which even after 2 years just hadn't launched. So it's a very different sort of mental cycle. The second piece I would add was, at Mud, I always felt as though there was a safety net. If I couldn't talk to a professor, I could talk to a staff member. If I couldn't talk to a staff member, we would have mentors and proctors, friends all around. If you're lucky, you'll have a supportive manager, and I was lucky to have that. But kind of to Faith's point, a lot of it is independent. At the end of the day, it's still you driving what you're going to do. You have to ask for help yourself. And if you're falling, you're going to fall. You have to make your own safety net with the people around you. So
Right.
it takes a little bit of a learning curve, but you can get there.
Definitely. To add to that, advocating for yourself to have those mentors and to ask for help, because there isn't office hours either. And your manager might be very hard to find. So advocating for yourself to get the resources you need for sure.
Awesome. And just to follow up on that, you both kind of mentioned that same theme of having like a much more obviously an independent lifestyle and whatnot, and being independent at work. Did you guys, like, looking back, can you think of any resources or any opportunities at Mud that might have prepared you better for that, that students can take advantage of now? Or is it kind of just like always trial by fire?
Go ahead, Shailee.
I was going to say a couple of pieces that helped. One, even in my process of doing internships, or when we had various alums come back for career fairs, I used to make it a point to actually just reach out to people out of the blue. Often when you're working, you're trying to get a mentor, you might be in a situation where you actually know the person, but sometimes it's just a cold call. It's an email. It's just saying, hey, you seem pretty awesome. Can I learn from you? So able to just start to do that, whether that's from a career perspective, or it's just reaching out to a faculty member to learn more and build that relationship. I think that process definitely helped me and prepped me for doing the same in the workforce.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that. I remember distinctly when I asked Prof. Gokley to please be my engineering mentor, and I will take that memory every time I go into a new job and just have to like buck up the courage to ask this person that you super admire and respect to spend their time talking to you. Another resource that I really enjoyed as an engineer was, of course, Clinic for the 3 semesters, and being able to interact with a company with the grace of Mud safety net if things do go wrong for some reason during Clinic. You still have the opportunity to have those sort of big bad conversations about like, oh, we're behind on a deadline, or we don't have the resources we need. Let's figure out how we get those. I think doing the best you can to, really be the voice of your team during Clinic is also nice, and not just always having maybe your professor mentor taking any role in the communication, but really trying to own that, because it prepares you for that communication in the industry moving forward, because it can be entirely different than the emails you send Mud professors, guaranteed. So yeah, take advantage of that opportunity.
No more internims, no more ISOs.
No.
Fun fact, I did briefly start internims. For anybody who doesn't know, I think at Med, when we sign emails, you put your name and you put something in quotes in the middle and at the end. I did briefly start that at Uber Freight. I had 2 people respond with internims. I call it a success.
I love that.
Awesome. Thank you guys for that. So our next question here is more specific to our theme for today. So you guys are both in industries or have worked in industries that tend to be pretty male heavy, male dominant. And so did you guys ever find when you were looking for jobs or choosing your career, was this like something difficult to grapple with, or was it something that you guys didn't really think about that much? Yeah, could you guys just touch on that and how that affected your career choice, or maybe like the industry you were interested in?
Yeah, definitely. As I mentioned, I started in manufacturing, and I think the despair, the number of women potentially on our team versus the number of men, or rather the potential power dynamic between all of the men being managers and only women being like entry engineers. I find that difference to be far more obvious when it's not a good team dynamic to begin with. So I definitely had teams where it like felt more of a stark difference because I didn't feel heard, and I felt like part of that was because they weren't trying to understand what I was saying or taking me seriously. I will then say I had some really fantastic women managers who kicked ass and showed me how to, be that strong, assertive, communicative manager. And now that I actually work on a team now, the wine industry is interesting in that a lot of winemakers and a lot of the people who work in vineyards are men, and a lot of the people who work in hospitality are women. But because feels so much more social equity between all of the team members, it's a much less stark difference compared to teams I've been on in the past.
I can share my experiences as well. So I would say two different experiences. One was during an internship, and one I would say actually entering the workforce post graduation. My first internship was at Google, and I think at that point I knew that there would be many more men over women, but because at Harvey Mudd it felt so 50-50, it still was a shock to me when I went in, looked around at my cubicle area, there were no women. The men were very encouraging, very supportive, but at the end of the day, as an intern, I was looking to see what can I be in a few years, and there weren't too many people to emulate that. Um, to that point, actually, when I was interning, I ended up starting a program called Women Empowered, where we would bring together women across Google. This could be engineering, legal, sales, and we would get together in these small lunch groups. I bring this example up not to say, hey, look at what I started, but to say all it took was a single email. So often we have women who are higher up in the chain. They're excited to give back. They want to listen to younger women. And you have so many younger women who are just bursting with ideas and don't have a place to necessarily put it or a place to share it. So we ended up doing 20 or 30 of these just over the summer, and it was so fun. So for any of you who are feeling something like you don't have that connection in your team, I would highly recommend you start to expand it on yourself. The other part I would actually say is since I entered the workforce post graduation, it wasn't as much being a woman that was in my mind as much as being younger than everybody else that ended up impacting me. In my role specifically as a product manager, I'm trying to advocate for the work that other people do to say, actually, you should prioritize X instead of Y. Many of those individuals who may be years older than me. And maybe they believed in me, but I definitely didn't believe in myself. So it was that sort of process of how can I start to see the merit of my ideas rather than the fact of who I am compared to others. I would say I think Zoom is an interesting equalizer in my case. Because most of my meetings are online, I don't notice when I'm the only woman anymore. It's just a lot more voices and it's a lot harder to interrupt. So it's easier to keep talking and not feel as self-conscious. So some interesting changes from the Zoom world, I would say.
Thank you both for sharing those experiences and kind of going along with that. I know you talked about just going over all those different departments coming together and meet, but how would you say you advocated for yourself, or how do you create your own opportunities for growth in your own career, seeing those managers being possibly all male or just heavily on majority male? Can you give any advice to our students here today?
Part I would say is you should feel free to forge your own path. The first thing, at least I started to do, was try to emulate people and copy people. But if at the end of the day, the people around me don't actually match my personality, if they're, let's say, super type A and that's not me, I found myself in my first role just trying to force myself into a box. Did it work? Maybe, kind of, but did I feel good at the end of the year? Not really. So I know this is super cliche to say, be yourself. But the workforce truly is better every time we bring a new diverse perspective, a new way of approaching something. So if at Mudd you think you have a particular identity, you should start to bring it in. Not only will you be better, the users or whoever is in your audience will be better for it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And to kind of echo that, I think we might have expectations as young people, as as young people, as women, as coming from the STEM world, we might have expectations that people won't listen to us because we're young or because our voice seems quieter in the room for some reason. And I think I can thank a handful of managers for really encouraging me to step up and be loud. But when I joined this team here, which a lot of management is are men, and a lot of the hospitality non-management are women, the only barrier was one that kind of was self-enforced. It felt very odd the first time. I was like, well, what's that meeting about? And my manager at the time was like, I don't know, we're not invited though. And I was like, dang right, I'm invited. I don't know about you. And just because it is a small team and we're all hands in. And this works better or worse depending on where you are. But I just started like literally sticking my nose into, meetings just to be asking questions. And, especially when you're new and young, asking good questions is hugely respected by patient managers, which you always hope you have at least a patient manager. And then they notice what you're interested in. If you spend more time listening, then you will listening and giving good results based on the answers you get. You're going to get invited to more meetings, and you're going to get invited to sit at that table. Something that I found in different roles to get kind of that attention, just whether the manager was busy or whatever it may be, was finding the task that no one wanted to do because it was historically the worst task that no one wanted, and making it the best, most fun task and being the champion of that. Like, we have inventory here, no one wants to do it. I just was like, why does it have to be so hard? And now I am the inventory guru. That is what I am responsible for. That's what people come to me for. That was very early on when I first started here, but that's a great way to sort of like bring attention to what you can do without having to go ask someone for a project, is find what people don't want to be doing and making that better.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And then just another question we had, which was kind of touched upon already, but if you had anything else to add to it, what are some characteristics of the workplace where you felt supported? I know you touched upon a patient manager and positivity, but was there anything else where you really felt supported by the company you're working for, and maybe something that students should look out for when they are interviewing at a new company?
Definitely. A couple of ideas that pop off my head, and we'll see how we can help students ask this during their interviews. As people, when we go to work, we're not just that worker, we are an entire person. We bring with ourselves our background, our perspective. Call it baggage, or you can call it a bonus, which is the way I prefer to look at it. But that means I would also look for a team that allows you to bring your whole self. In that entire interview, say you had an interview for 5 or 6 hours, did they ask you anything other than maybe what you're going to be outputting, if that could be something engineering related, something CS related, or do they start to really show that they're welcoming you as your entire person? So that's one thing I would look at. The second piece, this one might be harder to do in an interview. Workload and work-life balance is something we, of course, used to talk about at Harvey Mudd. It's also true after Mudd. You will be in control of a lot more for yourself, but if you can find yourself a manager who isn't just giving you project after project after project and is genuinely concerned and aware of your workload, that can really make a difference between night and day.
Yeah, definitely. I think getting a feel for the workload at a company and just making it sure it matches what you want. I have worked at a company previously that expected a lot more hours from me than I was willing to give. And I think you should feel empowered in the interview to realize that an interview is a two-way street. If the company isn't going to work for you, you shouldn't work for that company. That goes with the company matching your philosophy individually, because you're going to be doing that work a huge amount of your day. And if it sucks to be doing something because you don't believe in it, then that's a problem. Similarly, if you just get a feel from the people just walking around the building, if you get a feel from people that you don't hear a laugh or any conversation going on whatsoever, just like clacking of keys or phones ringing, like that should just give you horror movies sort of chills. But I think asking those good questions of, what they expect from you, what an average day looks like. I think I am hugely an advocate of understanding what a day looks like in a job, because just because something sounds interesting doesn't mean what the day-to-day work of that job is interesting. So yeah, treat an interview like a two-way street, because they want you, otherwise they wouldn't be interviewing you.
100%. And on that last piece of just they want you to, you're all coming from mud. They do want you. I know it gets so easy to get scared, like, oh, I'm interviewing for this big company, I have to say all the right things. They are also trying to say the right things. I was going through my first hiring somebody else process actually today, and I was nervous of being able to answer all of their questions. So really remember, you also are on equal footing as you find your home for the next year or more.
Thank you guys so much for sharing. Another question we have is, how do you build and maintain your positive relationships in a workplace?
Yeah, I think that's a really fantastic question, and one that I've been thinking about recently, being on a team where it felt really natural to build relationships. I was thinking back at previous jobs I've had. I think, especially at a large company, it's important to understand your team's relationship with other teams, and to not get so sucked into your team is the best team or your team is the most important team, and understand how you all play together in this little web that is a company. I've worked at places that try to sort of pit teams against each other because they thought that that would help with productivity. It did not. And you can play a personal role there in just getting that understanding. I've had great experience where I've expressed interest to managers like, hey, we interact with this team a ton. Can I shadow them for a day just to understand what they do every day? And that's a great way to build relationships. Approaching every interaction with the humility of understanding that you do not know what you do not know. And I would also add to that, don't only go to people when you need to ask something of them. Engage with people actively, ask how their day is, be a genuine human being. This shouldn't sound like such a heroic thing to do, but it can be difficult when we're so zoned in, especially with COVID, when we're so zoned in and we're just like, nose to the keyboard. But go and take a walk around your office and go say hi to people. It's worth that like 15 minutes it takes to do that, because you don't want people to see you coming up and be like, oh, Faith has something for me I have to do again. And on that same wavelength, not just getting to know the managers of the other teams if you're a manager, but getting to know everyone who works under that person, because oftentimes like those folks might know even more than the manager does, depending on the type of company you work at. So just never knowing who you are going to need information from and who's going to be the most helpful person, and just being friendly and genuine.
Absolutely. Plus 10 to the friendly and genuine. And the part to remember is you are spending 50 hours, 60 hours, 40 hours with these people. Chances are that's more than you're spending with your significant others, family, friends. So it really comes down to, if that is the time you're spending with these people, what is a relationship you want to have? And there's no right answer. You could be someone who says, I'm spending so much time with them, I want this to be my work family. And you really focus on having that good camaraderie and the sort of friendship. The other way to think about it is, well, this is work. I don't need everybody to like me. I don't need to like everybody else. I just need to have a strong enough relationship to get work done and to communicate. Either of them is fine, but I would say think about it intentionally, because you do put a lot of hours with this. And the second piece I will say is, just as much as you want a positive environment, you yourselves are creating a positive environment. So if what you find is you're doing projects and you don't think you're getting encouragement, start to give encouragement to other people after they do a presentation. Say, great job, that was a great slideshow, that was a great pitch. And you'll slowly find that those sort of actions you'll start to come back towards you. And that's how a new culture and a new community forms.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for that. Those are great insights. I do want to remind the audience that we do have the Q&A panel. So if you have questions, don't hesitate to drop them in and we will get to them. So yeah, thank you guys for that. So moving on more to, I guess, like work you actually do. What have you guys found in your career? I guess somewhat career agnostic so that it kind of applies to everybody, but what typically is it that separates the top performers from mediocre performers?
I'd say taking initiative. As we're doing our work, and this is something Faith alluded to earlier on, yeah, sometimes you'll be told what to do, but often you're going to have to figure it out for yourself. So regardless of what your role is, usually there's some problem that you're being asked to solve and you're trying to output a solution. Regardless of your discipline, go out and find your own problems. Figure out what is it that needs fixing, pitch it. It might get shut down, but regardless, you've now started the process to make sure you're able to find the right pieces. So I'd say whether it's in very small ways, and that's totally okay, or larger ways, that's how you can really help and ensure that you're contributing more than just, checking off the boxes of what your manager may have asked you to do.
Yeah, definitely. I think it is that difference between checking off boxes and really getting excited about something that you're going to be spearheading yourself. You don't have to be passionate about what the whole company does if you can be passionate about what your team does. And that's, kind of goes back to make sure you're interviewing your interviewer to understand like what those goals and philosophies are. But people who take ownership of their own learning and training, long term, you're not just in training your first 6 months. You are always learning. You are always in training. I would say the second part is when given feedback or making mistakes, taking those as learning opportunities and not being defensive or being beaten down. I know sometimes, especially as a new, starting your first career, maybe like your first 3-month or even 30-day assessment might feel crippling to just be told like, hey, and also you should probably spend more time doing this. And that could just be a paralyzing moment if you haven't received an assessment like that before. You will have so many more in your life. That is fine. Take that as a learning. Say if it was delivered well, say thank you. I'm going to work on this and make an active decision to work on those things and understand how they will help you in your career.
I love that last point. And just to make an analogy, you're a student at Harvey Mudd. Are you getting 100% on every single problem set in an exam? I don't think that's possible. That's why you're at school, to learn. This is your first job, your second job. If you were amazing, you would be the CEO of the company. Just kind of keep that in perspective of you are here to learn. If you're not making mistakes and you don't have somebody to tell you about it, that might be a sign that you're not in the right place. So enjoy being a newbie. This is the perfect time to do it.
To add to that, I hired a new staff member recently, and I told her, milk being new as long as you can, because people want to tell you things and to show you things and to teach you things when you're new, and then just carry that on once you're not even considered new anymore. Just carry that with you. Just always be like, what? I did not know that. Tell me more every time.
Do it.
Mm-hmm.
So generally then on that point, would you guys like generally describe that as just like having a strong curiosity that like persists beyond just that initial phase?
Absolutely. There was something that somebody had told me early on, that you need to be a sponge. There's knowledge around you. You're just constantly soaking it in. You could be 10 years on the job. There's always something new that you are learning that you are now starting to apply. So that sort of, growth mindset, constantly there.
And that goes back to making a very intentional choice about not just the company, but the specific role in the team that you're going to be on. I have been in a position where I had a manager give me the feedback that I needed to start my own projects I was doing great work, but I needed to come up with something new that I was excited about. And after like a month of trying, I was like, wow, I'm just not excited anymore. I'm not excited here. And was able to make a really positive change that I think helped everyone involved. So being intentional from the beginning, not finding yourself at that position maybe a month later, but being intentional of like, is this something that I can be excited about forever? It's not, we can't be curious about the most mundane things. So don't force yourself to be if you think that's going to be difficult. If you like mundane things, that is awesome. Lean into that. But yeah, I would just echo that. You gotta find what you're curious about and just keep being curious.
Awesome, awesome. You just mentioned mentorship again. It seems like a theme, like a recurring theme for us. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about that. Obviously, you guys both mentioned that mentorship is important. It obviously plays a role in your career and your development. But what do you guys find are the most effective ways to not only find a mentor? We mentioned alumni, we mentioned networking a little bit with your Harvey Mudd peers, but also like actually utilizing those mentors effectively, because I think a lot of times we can get into a cycle of where like we have the resources, but we're not always taking advantage of them or utilizing them. So how have you guys found the best ways to actually utilize the mentors and the great managers you have once you have them at your side?
When we think about mentors and reaching out, there's almost two ways which we consider it. One can be really just an informational interview. You talk to them, you get some piece of information, and you're done. You both move on with your lives. The second piece, and that's what I'm really going to call a mentorship, is where you develop a relationship. So it's not just one meeting, it's maybe you meet once a month, once a year, whatever it is. But as a mentee, you are still keeping them up to date with your life. Both of these are helpful. I know as I mentor people, I find a lot more satisfaction when that person I helped, when I give them, say, X advice, they email me the next week saying, hey, I actually took it, X advice. It worked or it didn't work. And then I automatically feel so much more invested in them. And I'm likely to continue to say, yes, I will continue to talk to you. So I would say, yes, your mentors are taking time to help you out. How can you also help them make it an easier process? So both informational interviews, which you can really do with anyone, but really choosing the people who you continue to build a relationship with, keeping them updated over email. My intern managers from college, so this has now been 5 or 6 years, I think every year I probably send them 1 or 2 emails just to keep them updated. And it always starts such a wonderful thread of learning about their lives, trying to see if we can help each other out. So think of it as a two-way relationship that goes on for more than just 30 minutes of that mentoring session.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it, is like being very intentional about reaching out. I have had several different mentorships, and I had one that was set up by the company. It was like I was given sort of a mentor when I started, and it felt very forced, and it was sort of prescribed that like we had lunch once a month, but we never interacted outside of that. So it felt very inorganic. I would say the most successful mentors I've had are people who I have personally sought out because I have seen them talk about a project, or I have heard about the work that they do, and I found that fascinating, and I was able to express to them, like, I super admire what you do, and I would love to be just able to sit down and have coffee and keep that level of conversation up, as Shailee was saying. Probably my best work mentor relationship was when I was at Niagara, and I was placed with somebody, but we had a lot of stuff in common. She was also an engineer. She was from Caltech, and she asked me to email her every week. And it sucked the first few weeks because I was like, ugh, I already have a boss. Like, why do I have to report to somebody else? But then I realized that what I report to a mentor is entirely different than what I report to a boss. And that's how you sort of build that relationship, is telling them more of like the challenges you ran into that week and how maybe you overcame them, or asking like, hey, next time I get coffee, I'd love to discuss this further. Because that just builds a much stronger relationship than, as Shailee was saying, like sitting down once, extracting the information, and then going about your lives, which again is helpful if that's all you need, but keeping in touch really creates a more organic mentorship.
Awesome. You guys are dropping gems here. I'm learning a lot today, so I'm loving this. Um, Perfect, perfect. So shifting a little bit here, um, still talking about early career advice and whatnot. Um, what would you guys do differently if you could redo, like, I would say the first maybe 2 years of your career and maybe like also your senior year of college, if there was something you would do differently to prepare yourself? Or if you wouldn't do anything differently, if you found something that was particularly effective that you're happy that you did in your early career or late college career.
Yeah, because I was gonna say I'm actually pretty proud of myself, and I give myself that grace to be very proud of myself of how I spent the first few years out of school. I worked at two different companies. I had several roles within those companies, each a each an intentional move that was supported by the company, something that I sought out to do to expand my knowledge at that company. But each time I ran into something where it's like, oh, this isn't a good fit anymore, I sort of gave myself that permission to quit, which can be hard for mutters to do. We like to stick with stuff, even if it is painful and you don't have to, we will. And so let me give you that permission that if you're really hurting in a job, if whether it's a manager who, and let's say a role, not a job. So, if you have a manager that's just, you can't get anything, done, or they're just really discouraging to you, see about getting on another team. If you're not passionate about what you do on that team anymore, ask for a new project, or again, maybe there's something else you can be working on. I obviously have a pretty drastic career path since Mud in terms of the U-turns I've taken at different points, but giving yourself the grace of trying out a bunch of different stuff when you're right out of school, because the world sort of gives you that grace when you're in your 20s. It might be a lot harder if you're 40 to suddenly make that career change, and people might look at your resume and be like, well, you've done this for 20 years. Why? It makes, people don't hesitate as much when you only have a couple years under your belt out of school. So I would recommend just giving yourself that grace to be very intentional about making career moves or staying where you like to be staying.
So well said. +1. I was going to talk about quitting. You already nailed it. I was going to talk about expanding yourself. Nailed it. I think when we think about different generations, maybe a few generations before our great grandparents, they might be in that same job for their entire life. You can then get to maybe the generation before us. They might switch jobs a few times, but they'll still be in a pretty similar role. I think now, as we're moving forward and the way our world is moving, is you could be jumping from industry to industry, role to role. It's so much easier to be able to shift around. And that means that when you're starting off, if you can build as wide, as broad of an understanding as possible, that's perfect. And bonus, Harvey Mudd sets you up for it. You're being set up for that multidisciplinary, wide HSA, science, math sort of approach. Keep doing that in your job. If that means you're working on something, see if you can go to different workshops, talk to other teams to really get a better sense of what's happening. That might make you better at your job, or it might help you realize that there's actually a better job for you. Because surprise, surprise, chances are the first job you take out of college isn't your forever job. It's not the perfect fit. It's your chance to figure out what could be the right fit. So use that opportunity to explore.
Yes, +1.
Thank you guys so much for sharing. We actually have a question from the audience that kind of goes along with that. They are surprised that so early on in your careers, you guys are so successful in your manager roles. And you guys touched upon it a little bit about how, Faith, you were hopping around and quitting and doing what you needed to do to find the best fit for yourself. But is there anything else besides the things just mentioned, like any special training? Was it because of your degree? Was it the Mud reputation? Is there anything else that would help accelerate other fellow Mudders roles into becoming managers?
Yeah, I'll speak to sort of my background and why I am a manager where I am now. I would say that a huge part of being a manager is being a jack of all trades. I actually almost always saw myself as being more of a manager because I am not someone who will become an expert at one thing. I admire people who are. Um, and so I always have been kind of leaning towards I would like to have a team that I can support. In terms of how that's come into fruition, when I was at Niagara, I was part of their leadership development program. Shailee and I have touched on, showed a ton of initiative by getting very excited about the different projects. I jumped into a team that was like 2 people before I joined it, and that really propelled me to being like at the forefront of, I managed accounts like Pepsi, like as a 22-year-old. That's insane. But it's because I just kept pushing for more responsibility and showing that I could take it. And I was very fortunate that timing lined up that way. When I started at McMaster-Carr, I was similarly hired into a management trainee role. And so the intent was for me to supervise a team, which I did pretty early on. And I would say that both of those roles that I got put into starting at those 2 different companies were because of my degree at Mud. That is 100% like McMaster-Carr loves Mudders. If you're looking for a job. McMaster-Carr loves Mudders. They will hire people specifically from places like Mud because they know how good of managers Mudders make. Niagara is very similar. Niagara has a really fantastic relationship with Mud. I'm sure they still do clinics with them. That being said, my current role was that work hard, learn what you have to learn, start from sort of the bottom, and then opportunities will present themselves. And that is a little bit more traditional. And I would say that if you find yourself in that position, have the excitement and the patience for it, because it's very worthwhile. And I feel much better equipped to be a manager in my current role than I did in those previous ones, because but just because they hired me because of my degree. But here, so if that is the path that you will be taking to become manager, sort of starting at quote unquote the bottom and working your way up, be excited and have patience for it, because it's really worth it.
Perfect. Nothing to add.
Awesome, thank you. So like I mentioned before, that was from the audience. We'll keep going with that. We do have a question here about if you have ever faced some form of covert sexism in the workplace. Say someone keeps interrupting you or doesn't listen to your ideas, but doesn't do this to other men. What are some steps that you have taken or plan on taking to help make sure your voice is heard? I know we touched upon this a little bit about you touched upon it a little bit, but I would love for you to deep dive into this again.
Yeah, there's of course so many different ways in which you can deal with this. And I would say, think about what keeps you comfortable. If you deal with it in a way that just is going to get you stressed out for the rest of the week, also take your own mental health into consideration. I tend to be someone who for better or worse, it plays it safe. So I found that when I'm in situations with interruptions, I don't tend to speak up right away, but what I do try to do is find other allies in the room. So for example, suppose if Faith was starting to talk and somebody interrupted Faith, I found it a lot easier to say, oh, Faith, you had that great idea, and to advocate for her rather than advocating for myself. And in turn, then Faith, I'm sure, if Niall interrupted me, would come to the rescue and say, oh, actually, Shailee had a great idea, and add on to that. So I would say if there's regular meetings where this is starting to happen, just reach out. It could be to your mentor, it could be to other women in the group, whoever your allies are, and really build that sort of network. It can take a little bit, but I found it really works, and it doesn't really lead to any negative emotions. It's just positivity all the way.
Yeah, 100%. Finding that ally is so important, and something that if you can't immediately find an ally, especially if you are the only woman on a team, bringing it up to a manager, especially like I had a fantastic manager right out of college when I was at Niagara, and he is someone that I could say like, hey, this guy called me sweetie 5 times today and I'm tired of it. And he would be like, well, that's kind of gross. Okay. And, you know, he's in a better position to sort of like not make a fuss. And that's why you would go to, you know, your manager, someone you know who knows how you would want this sort of conversation handled. And so maybe it's saying something like, you know, noticing in the future and be like, well, that's a weird thing to say. What I also found, if I was just working, and this was something that came up a lot when I worked in manufacturing, if I was getting a lot of touches on the shoulder or like, hey, honey, do you need any help with that? And things like that, which is more just annoying and frustrating and just, let me do my job. I would honestly, I found my defense mechanism was sort of poking fun back at people and just kind of being like, well, that's gross. Why'd you say that, man? But like in a way that, you know, comes across as like, I'm just a kid trying to get my work done. And that for me, was how I was defensive. And that's actually kind of how I got to better know some people in the manufacturing, because they thought it was kind of funny. So you really have to find your environment and figure out what works. But I would say best, least confrontational, and safest is what Shailee was saying, where it's just like, sometimes you lock eyes with the other lady in the room and you're just like, I got your back. So look out for those opportunities.
Thank you guys so much. Some great advice. Another question, kind of hopping away from your career and career trajectory. We have a question here. What issues of dress have you faced at work, if any?
Yeah, I can say very confidently, I haven't had any issues. I think there is more dress code for women. That just tends to be the case because they assume men won't go out and wear skirts. That's the only, you know, or show off all their beautiful chest hair. Like that's kind of why there's always more dress code for women. What was frustrating in manufacturing is that PPE and like GMP practice, or GMP, is more restrictive for women as well, in terms of jewelry, painted nails, all things that are directed towards sort of like, you can't wear all your shiny stuff when you're out on the floor. And it feels very directed towards women, even though we all know that those aren't things that are exclusive to women. So that was always weird in manufacturing, to be like, all right, ladies, take off your rings and stuff. It's like, okay, but he wears his necklace all the time. I don't get that. Other than that, no, I would say that whatever like old school 50s sitcoms prepared us for is not the reality that I have found.
Same here. Maybe it's part of the tech industry where people just wear whatever they want to wear. But I don't think I've seen anything. And I think I found very diverse where people sometimes wear small shorts, they wear long skirts, they wear like everybody does seem to be wearing everything that they want. It's just pretty cold, so you don't have too many options when you're inside of an air conditioning building. But really no issues so far, which is awesome. And I hope the same for those of you in the call.
Awesome, thank you. I want to give the audience a couple more minutes if anyone else has any last minute questions, but while they may be typing away right now, did you guys have any parting words for the group? Anything that stands out the most from our talk that you say, if anything, above all else, I want you to walk away with this, or just any last minute thoughts?
Be very confident in yourself. You are coming from Harvey Mudd College. I know you get told that all the time. I'm sure your mom loves telling you, you go to Harvey Mudd, that's such a great school. It is. And I work in the wine industry now, and people still know what Harvey Mudd is. It blows my mind. I'm all the way up in Oregon. It blows my mind. And again, give yourself permission to quit. Just give yourself that permission. As Shailee was saying, I liked her analogy. You don't always, or I like what she was saying, like your first career isn't going to be like, might not be the best fit. That chances are that's just not the case. So keep that in mind. And your major does not define what you can do. Mudd prepares you to do pretty much anything.
Totally. The other part I will say, if any of you were interested in the mentorship piece of, oh, this sounds great, I think I want to mentor. I'm about to volunteer. Faith and I, we are totally willing to talk to you. This is, of course, a very general setting, and we're trying to offer general guidance. But you'll have our emails, LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out. Would love to see how we can help. I helped a few young women last week who I had zero mutual connections with, just because it's so fun. So now imagine if you're from Harvey Mudd, it would be a delight to be able to talk to you and hear about your journey. So don't hesitate on reaching out.
Please do.
Awesome. Thank you guys. There was one more question that I had a friend ask me to ask you guys. So she mentioned that given Mud is very balanced, it's like, I think it's like 51-49 right now, female to male. Was it a large shock going to the workplace where you didn't see that, immediate balance, or was this something you were prepared for and expecting? I think Faith, I think you mentioned this balance earlier a little bit. But if you could just like touch on how you guys reacted to that, or if you guys were prepared for that.
It was kind of jarring. And I will say one of my closest friends to this day is a young lady from Caltech who I met on my first day at Niagara. And we almost literally clung to each other and said, we will get through this. And it was never as bad as we ever thought it would be. But having that one ally, kind of as Shailee was saying, that one ally in the room at all times was just so nice. So understanding that you can't always go it alone. If for some reason you feel alone in your identity in your workplace, find somebody, because then they also might feel a little alone.
I think I touched on this. My first internship, I felt the shock.
I think you muted yourself, Shailee, on accident.
I was dropping a gem right there. No, I was just saying that I think I'd shared earlier with my first internship experience, I definitely felt that difference. For me, I stopped noticing it. Maybe it's because of Zoom, maybe it's something else. It just hasn't been as apparent. I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. Sometimes when it's always one type, you just become used to it. But I think over the years, you'll start to see what is it really that actually is more important or it's mattering to you more. It might not be gender, it could be something entirely different. And then you get to be the person who starts to bring it on and make it an obvious part of the workplace.
Thank you guys. We do have a couple more minutes. So another question that popped up is there anything you can say to someone in an academic research type career as a woman?
Wonder if you have any, I did not go into the academic career, so if there's any specific questions if you want to ask, then maybe we can talk to that. Guessing a lot of it may apply anyways in terms of taking initiative, finding advocates for yourself. Workplace or academics, it can still be the same culture in terms of a gender balance.
Yeah, absolutely. They're just mentioning that this panel is engineering, but if they had any specific.
I would just add, and I can only speak to hearing different friends go through like grad school, if we're thinking more specifically grad school or planning to become a professor, really leaning at, you have mentors in your current professors if you are going into academics. So I have Prof. Coakley, and I know Prof. Orwin just left, but Prof. Orwin and Prof. Coakley are two professors that I reach out to annually. As Shailee was saying, maintaining those mentorships. So you're in a great position to start those mentorships now if you're planning on following the academic path, because all of our professors have done that before. So I would just say you have the wealth at your fingertips there in terms of mentorship.
Thank you guys so much. Those were all the questions that we had from our audience. So, and we're coming up on time. So I just wanted to thank our panelists for joining us today. Thank you, Niall, for moderating, and thank you to all of you for coming and participating in our webinar today. Have a great night, everyone.